you're obviously studying anomalous phenomena. Why would you make or have you even derived the inference that apart from the isotopes, why would you derive the conclusion that extraterrestrial origin is the most likely?
No, I never said that.
Culprit or
no?
Okay, fine, fair enough. You didn't, and so that's exactly why I'm posing the question. I'm not trying to corner you with that. I want to know, like, you're studying anomalous phenomena. You know of Charles Fort, by the way?
Very well. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Did you ever watch Magnolia?
No.
The movie?
No.
Oh, Magnolia is a great movie, by the way, and it's about Charles. It has a sub-theme of Charles Fort.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're interested in Charles Fort, Magnolia is very much worth watching. It's a great movie, also beautifully put together musically. And of course, Charles Fort studied anomalous phenomena his whole life, and Magnolia happens to be about that. But okay, so you're studying anomalies. Lay out the realm of hypotheses, because there's military experimentation. I mean, there's all sorts of obvious competing hypotheses. So tell me what you've what you've gone through, more about your foundation and what you've concluded.
So the principal reason for starting the Soul Foundation was that I was, because of, let's say, my public persona about this, more and more scientists were coming to me and saying, hey, I want to help. How can I do it? And then a common friend of Peter Skafish and I, along with David Grush, who I had met through all of these events. And David, again, was the guy who sat in front of Congress and testified about the alleged reverse engineering programs of which he was aware. And I met with Dave and spoken with him, very deeply, and watched every element of his body language as I possibly could to see, look for evidence of misconstruing him in some way. And as far as I could tell, he's telling, at least as far as he's concerned, the truth about what he knows. And I said, okay, well, we need a more formalized way to approach this. And so what do you do as a scientist in a new area? You start a society, more or less, or you start a foundation that becomes the lead foundation for other groups to come together. And the Soul Foundation pretty much has established itself as a nonpartisan umbrella group through which the many individuals who are interested in UAP and talking about it, in a professional manner, can come together. And our next event is going to be historic. It's going to be in Italy. And we've got people from the European Parliament. We've got a number of former, let's say, U.S. officials who will be there to talk about these matters. And again, I don't expect a revelation. I expect just from this people to come and know that there's a place where they won't be laughed at, but they can share, maybe give ideas. And one of the sets of ideas of what's going on right now is there's a big movement for what's called the UAP Disclosure Act. That, for your listeners, for the last 2 years, Senator Rounds and Senator Schumer, supported by multiple representatives on both sides of the aisle, have put forward a part of the bill that goes into the Defense Department bill, 60 pages of which talks about the reverse engineering programs and extraterrestrial, or not, let's say not even extraterrestrial, non-human intelligence. And that for, the next 5 to 10 years, there will be an oversight group which will collect and gather all of this information for potential benefit of humanity. Now, you just asked me about ruining my career. Would Senator Schumer, the head of the Democratic Party, and Senator Rounds, an important figure on the Republican side, come out and make any of these kinds of statements or allow for their offices to be the vehicles through which such a bill would manifest itself if they felt that they were going to be derided on the floor of the Senate? Probably not. And so There's Marco Rubio has come out openly and talked about this. He's now our Secretary of State. There's 20 minutes of part of a film that he's in where he's openly talking about the fact that there are these objects moving in ways that we don't know. I was speaking with your producer prior to your getting to the set. The Soul Foundation, one of our purposes, we put together press kits of like 15 different snippets from former heads of the CIA, the DIA, NSA, President Obama, et cetera, all saying there's something that we don't understand and is moving in ways in our atmosphere that we can't explain. And it appears to be technology. Now, they'd like you to think that it's something out of Lockheed, perhaps. But, these things were being seen before Lockheed existed, right? They were seen in World War II. They were seen subsequent to World War II, long before we had any capabilities. So what is it? I don't care. I don't care if it's human or not. I just want to have reproducible findings. And yet, somehow, for some reason, the government won't release the information that it has. I mean, just recently, there was a Freedom of Information Act release of the so-called Mosul orb, M-O-S-U-L, Mosul, Iraq, and a solid silver ball. That Arrow, which is the Anomaly Resolution Office of the Department of Defense, came up and said, "Yeah, we see lots of these things." The former assistant director of Arrow, which is the office programmed and set up by the DoD to collect the kind of information around these anomalies, openly stated just 3 weeks ago on a podcast that, yeah, we have videos of these black triangles that move in ways that we don't understand. Okay, if it's our technology and we can move in ways like that, why are planes still crashing at Reagan Airport? Right? Why are we letting airplanes use fuel when we have some other kind of technology that can move the way that these things can and is being kept a secret? Is that just for defense?
So you talked about black triangles and silver orbs. Can you go into a little bit more deep? Like what? I'd like to know the central phenomena. Where do you think most of the signal resides with regard to these anomalous sightings? What's the pattern?
The best pattern are what it is that the military sees. And those are the ones where I have a focus and where actually I'm involved with another group that's funded privately called Skywatcher. And what we're doing is we've been setting up sensor systems in what we call cleared areas where we know that there's no overflight. And we do sometimes work in concert with the FAA and others to make sure where we're setting up for repeatable measurements and sensor systems to see things. And we're seeing stuff that doesn't make sense. And so we're not coming to conclusions, but we're collecting the data. And because I'm a scientist, I'm like their principal advisor to this group. And we're setting up and doing the kinds of measurements that I think are necessary, because I'm not going to wait for the government. I'm not going to wait for daddy government to tell me what's right. I'm a scientist. I'm going to go out and do it myself. And so that's what we've done. And we've raised significant funds. I mean, and you can go look up Skywatcher on the internet and what it is that we're doing. And part of what we're doing is it's two purposes. One, it's basically aerial surveillance, partially just for drones, because we've seen what drones can do in wars. So, and you know about the drone incidents in New Jersey, right? And all of the hubbub that caused. Well, we were actually there. We were actually measuring things.
And what was that?
Some of them were simply drones. Some of them, though, were moving in ways that would be hard to explain by drones. But all the stuff that we observed close to shore was clearly human activity. But so we're setting up Skywatcher as sort of a dual purpose. One is to work with the government to hopefully, or defense contractors, or anybody who wants to pay for our services, to collect aerial data basically as rapidly as possible, because often you can't deploy the necessary equipment on site quickly enough to collect the data when there's an anomaly that shows up. I mean, our principal goal is protection of the United States. But if in so doing, we happen to collect other information about some, let's say, anomalous objects, we will have the tracking data necessary to say, hey, well, we don't understand this. And it's important to know, because if it isn't a human adversary who have capabilities that we don't appreciate, even if somewhere in Area 51 they have something that does that, it's good for, I think, our military, the more public aspect of our military, to know that these objects do exist and report them when you see it, because it might be the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians, right? You want to know this, because if you ignore it, you could be ignoring the data point off the line that is important to know about. Always back to that. Don't ignore the anomalies, because anomalies, just about every single Nobel Prize that was ever awarded in physics and chemistry or biology is because somebody paid attention to the anomaly.
Right. Yes. So, tell me about the patterns of anomalous activity that characterize, that define something as an unidentified aerial phenomena, and then tell me what you've concluded as a consequence of your investigations, and where you. Yeah, let's do that.
So there are, let's say, 5 characteristics of something that you would think of as an anomaly. One is instantaneous acceleration and deceleration, right? There's very few things that we know of that can go from 0 to 5,000 miles an hour and then stop on a dime without squishing everybody on the inside, sending them through the windshield. So when you see these things go from, in the case of the, I think it was the Nimitz or the Eisenhower, goes from sea level to space in less than a second, and they have the radar trackings of those things. And now imagine the size of the object. Let's say it weighs a ton. To instantaneously accelerate and decelerate at that level, it takes would take the energy of more than the nuclear output of the United States for a year. Okay, so where did you get that energy, first of all? So instantaneous acceleration and deceleration. So seeing things that do zigzags across the sky means that somebody or something has control if it's going fast enough, and it's not doing an arc. It means something has control of momentum and inertia. They can negate momentum and inertia. So that's an observation seen hundreds, if not thousands of times by pilots all over the world. So what does that mean about our understanding of physics, first of all? So that's one thing. The other is no apparent flight surfaces and no apparent exhaust. So no energy output. So you're moving and doing these things, and yet if you look at them with FLIR, which is a kind of infrared, you don't see any hot spots. If you were to look at a jet, all you would see is the plume from the jet. So no flight surfaces, meaning, basically Bernoulli's principle is not at play here, right? Which is basically how the wings work and lift. So Bernoulli's principle is not at play. So you're moving without a flight surface and without an apparent mode of inertia. You're not putting something out so that you can move forward. And then the other one is what you would think of as what's called transmedium travel, meaning something that can go from the water to the air and then back again, or to the air and to space. We have nothing that can do something like that. Recently, there have now been drones made and talked about openly, and actually these are U.S. drones just shown on I saw on a military video recently, where drones can be underwater, travel, and then come out of the water and go do the attack. But that's only been developed in the last, few years, not something from 50, 60 years ago. So those are the kinds of things that people see. And again, it's you ask me what I think of as real. Those anecdotes are, to me, stories. And why I get interested in the medical or the material side is it's something I can repeat. I can't repeat these pilot observations, but I can repeat experiments on materials or experiments on human, but reading the humans who've been harmed. Now, the thing about Skywatcher is that we, at least in a limited sense, have a signal that can be released that sometimes it seems to attract these objects. And so that's where the repeatability attempt is coming in.
Explain that a bit more.
So because it's a company and I'm not the official spokesperson for it, and this is public information that's out there, is that there's a signal that an individual as part of Skywatcher had determined when he was working with the military, it wasn't his purpose to develop it, so he didn't take anything out. It was sort of he noticed something and then he refined the technique, and now he knows that he has, let's say, an electromagnetic sequence that he can release that somehow seems to have these objects show up. And I was there when it happened. We go out on these week-long events in like the middle of nowhere, and stuff shows up. And some of it's been some of it's you can go find it on Twitter, but the stuff that's on Twitter isn't good enough, in my opinion. I'm more interested in the data that we're more recently collecting with better cameras and better sensor systems, because the idea is just to do the science.
So I think what we'll do on the Daily Wire side, because we have to wrap this up in relatively short order, I want to close here by asking you what you've concluded provisionally as an explanation for this, like what hypothesis you're nursing. And then on the Daily Wire side, for everybody watching and listening, I'd like to ask you more about stories about what you've seen, for example, when you've been on these Skywatch expeditions, and what the Skywatch program is reporting, and then also to delve a bit more into the political. You talked about the Schumer and I don't remember the other senator.
Senator Rounds,
this bipartisan proposal to declassify and make public
some of the information.
The narratives of sightings from pilots in particular. Okay, so we'll delve into that more on the Daily Wire side for everybody watching and listening, so you can join us there for an additional half an hour. To close up here, I think it would be useful for you to let us know, if you would, what the hell you think is going on, and what this has done. What this has done to you too. This has got to kind of come out of left field, so to speak, in a severe way. And so I imagine it's put a bit of a bump into your life. I mean, maybe one that's mostly interesting, but still, it's to call it strange is to barely scrape the surface. Yeah. So, what do you make of this?
That there's something non-human here, and it's been here for a long time, is my provisional conclusion.